I've said before that I do not want this to be a science channel, to become a science channel, but I don't know that I really have a choice. For one thing, so many people view science as a competing and even superior source of objective truth as compared to, say, Scripture, that you have to address it in some way. And many Christians are trying to address it, and it's incorrect the way most of them are trying to do it, in my opinion. But a part of that is most recent common ancestor data, and honestly, there's a lot about most recent common ancestor data that Christians don't understand, and unbelievers, people that are science-minded, don't understand. And so I want to go through some most recent common ancestor misconceptions. Do I think science has it all right? Not really. I mean, see my video on Neanderthals, and you can see that the mainstream narrative, the mainstream science narrative, it's becoming dogma, but it shouldn't be. The evidence is really is not satisfactory. So, most recent common ancestor, it's a very simple idea. You take any population and you say, how far back in the past do you have to go before all members of that population had the same ancestors? And if you're saying only the same ancestor, in other words, an original founding pair, and that's what most people think of when they think of most recent common ancestor, then that may or may not be very far back indeed. So let's take a look at it in theory and then talk about the implications. Here we have a simplified look at human genetic diversity over time, including how long ago the most recent common ancestor would be if humanity started as a single couple. We know how much human genetic diversity there is now. We have done some measurements about how much change there is or increase in diversity over a generation. And so we just extrapolate that back in the past and we ask, how long ago could all of humanity come from a single couple? And the answer is about 500,000 years as a minimum. And that doesn't guarantee it was a single couple. That just say it could be a single couple. Now, that's not the biblical Adam and Eve, ladies and gentlemen. And I know that some, like William Lane Craig, has been all on this. Well, maybe Adam was a Homo heidelbergensis, wasn't even a Homo sapiens, and he came from that back in time. But let's get real. That's not the Adam and Eve of the Bible, whose sons were farmers and pastoral herders, and whose near descendants built cities and did metallurgy and all that sort of thing. So it doesn't make sense with a biblical narrative. If there was a single common ancestor for all of humanity that far back, it wasn't Adam and Eve. I mean, let's just face the facts. And so many creationists have realized this, and they're trying to save the model. Some are trying to find a way to where, well, maybe this number isn't that far back, and we can find a way to push it up some. Others, like I think Reasons to Believe, is saying, well, we know that Neanderthals bred with humans, and so maybe that is making the DNA look older than it is, and even that is getting, that this is not happening in the public very much, but it's happening. It's not in the spotlight, but it's happening. Those models are getting shot down too, because we can take genes that Neanderthals don't have and humans do, and see how far back those genes go in the past. And besides that, if you see my video on Neanderthals, there really is not, even though that it's accepted as fact, there really is not good evidence that Eurasians carry 1.5% of their genes from integration with Neanderthals. It's one of those things that a lot of people know that isn't so. And it wouldn't explain sub-Saharan Africans, because sub-Saharan Africans don't have that same supposed Neanderthal integration. So the model's falling apart, and most recently they've started appealing to miracles that are not attested to in Scripture, like, well, maybe Adam's sperm changed to a different ethnicity each week, or maybe Eve's eggs, she had the eggs for every nation in the world. And, to me, when you start, you can defend the miracles of the Bible. That's one level. But if you start using miracles that are not even attested to in the Scripture to try to save your model, I think you've got a problem. So my model is unaffected by that, by the way. You know, I've got a model for early Genesis. Adam is not the first human. It's not his role. The Bible doesn't even really say it's his role. Romans 5:14 says Adam is a figure of Christ. It doesn't say he's the father of all mankind. So all those people that were wondering, where did Cain's wife come from, and was Cain able to build a city, and who was Cain afraid of when he got expelled even right at the start? Their suspicions are right. Adam and Eve were not the first human. There were people outside the garden, and Adam was a model of Christ inside it. And so there was more diversity, genetic diversity in humans from the very start. We didn't come from a single couple. So all these models that say, well, gee, what's the most recent common ancestor for the first couple? They're giving you the time back to an event that never happened. Okay? If humanity arose as a population rather than from a single couple, then they had some genetic diversity to start. And instead of looking like the yellow on this diagram, it looks more like the red on this diagram. The humankind came into existence less than 100,000 years ago and has expanded its genome and genetic diversity from that larger base, much larger base than a single couple. Let me show you another way most recent common ancestor can be deceptive, though. Let's say for this scenario, a new breed of dog, a talking dog, is developed. You know, people just notice that a certain population of Shih Tzu had some strange mutations that maybe looked like they could have human-like vocal cords, and corgis seem to have a small population of them that had similar genes, and they mixed the two together, and lo and behold, a new breed came up a talking dog, and it was a wonder. And so what would the most recent common ancestor of this talking dog be? Well, if we just developed the breed, you might think position 4, but that wouldn't be it. I've got the positions numbered there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then even 7. The way we do most recent common ancestor data, it would show the most recent common ancestor way back at 1, 8,000 years ago, 9,000 years ago. Even though, that's because dogs came from a wolf-like population in Anatolia or the Near East, and they split into Eastern and Western dogs early. But corgis are from one branch, the Western dogs. Shih Tzu are from the Eastern branch, and so they are far apart from each other amongst the dog group. And so when you put them together and have a new breed, their most recent common ancestor is still way back there. They would just look like a population that, their common ancestors way back there, all right, but they just lived almost all their existence on the edge of extinction. That's what it would look like. If you took a small group of corgis, a small group of Shih Tzu, made a new breed, their most recent common ancestor, if you did this data, it would say they started a long way back but stayed near the edge of extinction their whole time. Now, that means it would look like this. It would be a long, long, skinny line, spent most of its time on the edge of extinction and just blossomed out recently. My friends, that's what humanity looks like. Humanity looks like it spent most of this 500,000 years on the edge of extinction and expanded even more dramatically than what I've got here shows in the last 100,000 years. Now, I don't think that's likely. I think maybe a better explanation for the data would be that the human population, whether the mixing came by divine intervention and God just took all the best genes from all the hominins walking around and made it into the new breed, us, or whether, if you're a naturalist and you don't believe of any divine interaction, that two dissimilar populations from different ends of the hominin line got together and it produced a new breed that was us. Either way, that would explain the data. that humanity looks like we spent most of our existence on the edge of extinction, just like this scenario I'm presenting here. Now, if instead of a mixture of Shih Tzu and Corgi made the talking dogs, what if there was another set of talking dogs that was just made from an offshoot of Corgis? Well, that would be like number 7. And their most recent common ancestor would be at position 7. But if you're mixing in the Shih Tzu with it, that takes your common ancestor all the way back, and I would maintain it's deceptive. It really doesn't say anything about when the new kind came into existence. Now, another reason these efforts to get the most recent common ancestor data down to a more reasonable date for creationist models is, the reason it doesn't work is because you've got the Y haplogroup data. And the Y haplogroup data rules out this idea of, well, you know, the Neanderthals, they mixed in with us and they made it look older, but then their genes, but they really weren't a part of us. And that theory, that whole idea there. Y haplogroup DNA is passed directly from fathers to sons. It is not lost. So that the oldest Y haplogroup in the current view is haplogroup A00. And it appears to be, under current reckoning, over 170,000 years old. So 170,000 years ago, some lucky guy had a son or sons, and they continued to have sons, so that every single generation from then until now had a male who had males. And that's what that means, that group, and there's hardly any of them around. There's just a smattering of haplogroup A's, double O's from folks of sub-Saharan African ancestry. There are very few A's, haplogroup A's in total. They are, even though, and this is a strange thing about Y haplogroup A, like haplogroup A00 and haplogroup AO are not necessarily closely related, nor is haplogroup A1 necessarily closely related to either of those. So they have they're very distinct. And in fact, Y haplogroup A is just a catch-all group. At some point down the line, there was a mutation in the Y chromosome that produced Y haplogroup B. And I show that at the red arrow, basically a hair over 100,000 years ago, according to the current estimates. Or I will say near current estimates. I'm going to show you something else in a minute that will impact that. All succeeding human Y chromosomes shared that mutation. In other words, they all came from the B ancestor, and they branched off more recently. There's just a few Y haplogroup A's, mostly scattered as a small minority haplogroup in sub-Saharan Africa. But all they have in common is they don't have the mutation that makes B. And then later on, there was a diversity of surviving haplogroups, and what that means is humanity became very successful. Look at the box in blue. And this is an oversimplified drawing, but the light blue zone, the light blue, corresponds to the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. Humanity got successful. This is when modern human behavior appears. You know, when we say someone is inhuman in everyday speech, we don't mean they can't make a flint scraper. That's not how we define modern humans, either in conversation or behaviorally today. And it's my position that's not how they should do it in anthropology. So the idea of what we call human, you should correspond to our everyday use of the word more, since human is not necessarily a scientific word anyway. It was around before and has been appropriated. But these groups here, you know, that's when modern humanity appeared. When modern humanity appeared with modern behavior. E, C, F, FT, and others, including R in the Europeans. But a new study has, just last year, in March of 2021, a new study has appeared which challenges this view. And it's in the Oxford Review. I will leave a link to it in the description section of this video. It's from the Oxford Review, published 13 October of 2020. Then the report on it is in Volume 38, Issue 3 of Molecular Biology and Evolution from March of 2021. And what it says is that the mutation rate across human Y chromosome haplogroups is variable, not the same. And what they found was that these groups that look older, and they didn't test any A's, it's unfortunate, but they didn't test any A's. But these groups that look older, like B, they have a faster mutation rate, up to 1.5 times faster than R and I and J and the rest that we're used to. And you see, they've made a little mistake here. They assumed mutation rates would be constant across haplogroups. So when they found their mutation rate, they found it by looking at Eurasian men, Europeans, East Asians, what have you. In other words, some of these younger Y haplogroups. And they didn't realize that they weren't constant. They weren't constant. What they found was the newer Y haplogroups have a slower mutation rate. The older Y haplogroups have a faster mutation rate. What does this mean in practical terms? It means the younger groups, since that was the standard they were using, they were about the age that they had always thought. They split off maybe 50,000 years ago. But the older groups are younger than they thought. In other words, it should look more like this. If instead of B coming up 101,000 years ago, maybe 67,000 years ago would be a more accurate figure if they use the proper mutation rate. Okay, so, and that's if there was just a single B individual. What if there was a population of B individuals and that was the founding population of humanity? In that case, B could be even younger. B could be moved down into the light blue square where everything else shows up. Now, you may be saying, but Mark, what about Y haplogroup A, the one that shows ancestors back 170,000 years or more? Well, I have a hypothesis, and I would challenge those in the field to test the hypothesis because it is very testable. I think the A's are an artifact of back mutations or deletions. They do not represent some group of population of humans that hung on for 170,000 years, and they barely hung on for all their existence, but somehow they kept having sons, and there's a few of them left today. I think the original founding population of humanity was something very much like BT, and some of those guys had a back mutation or a deletion. And what happened to be deleted was what? The so-called defining mutation that produces haplogroup B and all others. Okay? So there was just a few events in history where the back mutation just happened to be that very same mutation that we use to identify B. The deletion happened to be the same genetic material that we use to identify B and everything else. After all, they just define A as everything that doesn't have this mutation that makes it B on down the line. Could you test it? Yes, it's testable. You can look for a similar deletion which also shares many of the downstream mutations of another group. If you want to find if it's happened again recently. Or you could find someone whose near ancestors were doubtlessly of another Y haplogroup, yet they don't have the defining mutation of B. So if it's happened before, it could happen again, and yes, we can test for it. So if this is true, we are not looking at a humanity who has an unbroken line of fathers and sons from 170,000 years ago or even 100,000 years ago. And again, if B started as a population, it could be less than 60,000 years ago. Now, does that save young Earth creationism? No, nothing does. But it doesn't matter because that's not what the Bible teaches. Okay? What the Bible teaches is very much in line with what I'm suggesting here of an original group of human beings that God gave a commission in Genesis chapter 1, 2, but at some point down the line, it was time to bring mankind from innocence to accountability. And so a plan that would end in Messiah was initiated with Adam. And I say all that, folks, because yes, I love the science stuff just like you do. And I know that people are watching the science videos, but I have some things on this channel to say about Jesus too. And that's really the point. And I do wish you'd do me the kindness of listening to some of them. But thank you so much for listening to this one, and may God bless you.